Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we're going to start the session in 1 minute. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his descendants, to his companions and their followers, and the men and women that walk in their footsteps. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. This is session 29 of Surah Al-Baqarah. We've been under the shade of this incredible surah for, mashallah, almost about 1.5 years now, since January of 2023. And I hope, inshallah, that we've learned a lot. Those of you, either those who are in physical attendance or those who follow the live stream on YouTube, if you guys are interested in going back to any of the previous sessions, they're all available on the Tarbiyah website. And also on our YouTube page in the Tafseerah playlist. And I advise you, inshallah, if there are sessions that you've missed, please go back and watch those. They're available on YouTube, and give us your feedback. The whole point really is to keep that knowledge base available so that our community, inshallah, is able to benefit and grow. And we said that Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed at that critical time, essentially is almost nearly the very first surah revealed in the Madani period, only preceded by Al-Mutaffifin, which came down basically during the journey of Hijrah itself, or towards the end of that journey. And so Surah Al-Baqarah sets the tone and sets the stage for the entirety of the Madani period. Also, as far as the collection in the Mus'haf is concerned, Surah Al-Baqarah was collected in the actual book that you carry with you, the Mus'haf on the shelves. It's considered to be chapter 2, but when you think about the fact that Surah Al-Fatiha is the introduction, that would basically make Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 1, setting again the tone, setting the stage for the entire book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Al-Baqarah is a surah about a very particular concept, which is causing the earth to thrive for the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the cultivation of this earth, building a God-centric civilization, and us being the trustees, the khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. And the word that we collectively use, the phrase that we collectively use for this is imaratul ard, building the earth. But building the earth in a manner that satisfies the purposes of the Creator and not feeds the ego of man. We've covered a lot, and we are in section 3 of the surah, which focuses more on the foundations of Imaratul Ard. We talked about the prerequisites and so forth, but we've been talking for quite a while now about the foundations of this concept. And I said al-fikru wal-mal, intellect and wealth. You cannot build a God-centric civilization without the right set of ideas. It's not a random process. It's not an arbitrary thing. And you cannot do that without the right amount of financial resources. There has to be enough money to support the undertaking. Otherwise, great ideas can always be blown to bits by bombs. And so you have to be strong enough, and you have to be financially solvent, as they say, in order for your ideas to take hold, right? And so we talked quite a bit about intellect and about the right set of ideas that are basically foundational for the concept of Imaratul Ard. If we actually review the list very quickly, Ayatul Kursi, for example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, establishes the concept of Tawheed, the unadulterated oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We talked about cosmology and teleology and the names and attributes of God and all the incredible things. The Ayatul Kursi kind of builds the proper perception of God in the human mind. La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion, which is also another very famous ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, establishes the freedom of thought. God gave you the right, gave you the prerogative to make your own intellectual choices, including accepting or rejecting the Creator Himself. The story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Namrud, the Nimrod, who was basically the king of the Babylonians at the time, that particular story established the use of rationality in order to ascertain God's existence. And so you cannot use coercive measures, you cannot use violence, you cannot use oppression in order to establish God. This is something that the human mind has to reach kind of, on its own, right? So Ayatul Kursi establishes Tawheed. There is no compulsion in religion, establishes freedom of thought. And the story of Ibrahim and the Nimrod establishes the use of rationality to ascertain God's existence. The story of Uzair radiallahu anhu showed that civilizations rise and fall, and that sometimes good people suffer, and sometimes unrighteous people prevail. That is basically part and parcel of going through the difficulties of this dunya in preparation for the afterlife. The story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and the birds, which is the one that we talked about last night, showed us the necessity of doubt and the permissibility of doubt. It's okay to be doubtful of certain things. It's okay to voice that doubt. It's okay to ask questions. Ibrahim alayhi salam himself, had certain issues, and he said, Allah told him, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ, did you not believe? قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. Lord, I do believe, but I needed a little extra comfort, that's all. I have a tiny bit of seed of doubt in my heart that I needed to squash, so please show me something incredible. So it's okay to do that, and we even talked about, they call it the Cartesian doubt, after René Descartes, who in the 1500s basically was the first that came up with the concept of doubt, doubted everything, and what I talked about last time, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I exist. And this is how he basically, so he doubted everything, including his own existence, and then from there he realized, I'm thinking right now, which means someone has to be doing the thinking, and that's how he established his own existence, and from there went on to establish the existence of God Himself. We also talked about, so this is, we covered through that, we covered basically the necessity of having the good amount of ideas, and that is absolutely necessary for us. And one of the reasons why many young Muslims fall into the trap of atheism is that they have not been intellectually prepared for an unforgiving world, right? Their parents are very strong believers, right? Likely immigrants who came from a Muslim country where Islam is the culture, mixed up with their habits and their customs and the traditions, and really just, they've never questioned, their faith, they've never been challenged, they've never questioned the existence of God. And so they come into America where there is this free discourse, where everything is brought to question and everything is doubted. And while the parents themselves don't need, intellectual answers, they're just happy in their own faith. Their kids and their grandkids do, because, they are being challenged by all these people at school and in college and work and so forth. And so when confronted with some of these tough questions, those young people often don't have legitimate answers, and basically the construct of God in their mind collapses, and that's when they lose faith and they become atheists. And so as much as we teach our kids how to pray and how to make wudu and what's halal and what's haram and the stories of the prophets and the seerah of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, all great necessary things, on the other hand, we also have to establish the right amount of ideas in their own minds. I mean, as parents, ask yourself, did I ever sit down with my kids and talk to them about why good and righteous people suffer in the world? Because this is the one thing that atheists keep coming up every single day. God doesn't exist. Because if God existed, then righteous people would not suffer. Why are bad things happening to good people? Why do kids get raped and get slaughtered? Gaza itself, for the Muslims, it actually makes our faith stronger. But for people who live in Western countries, it could potentially erode people's faith when they don't have the intellectual response. All right? And so building the right amount of ideas in our own minds, in the minds of our families and children, is of the utmost necessity, especially in this age, where people have been completely disenchanted with anything that is metaphysical. They are repulsed, by metaphysical arguments and metaphysical perspectives. And so we really have to, take that extra effort. And this is becoming increasingly important. And I'll tell you why. Because, and I've said this, I think maybe, on other platforms, I said that Christianity and Judaism are both struggling. They're both severely struggling today, right? They're losing followers, and most of their followers are going where? They're either becoming atheist or they're becoming Muslim. All right? They're not converting to Hinduism or Taoism. They're either becoming atheist or becoming Muslim. All right? And so Christianity and Judaism are struggling. Christianity is struggling in two different ways. Struggling on the liberal side of things with the acceptance of all practices, the ordainment of gay priests, anything goes kind of thing, this extreme liberalism that left very little room for values and principles and so forth, made Christians indistinguishable from non-Christians. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone is welcome. Wear whatever you want to wear, dress the way you want to dress, say whatever you want to say, believe whatever you want to believe, come as you are, and we're just going to figure it out together. A lot of Christians have become alienated with that concept because people still need structures, they need boundaries, they need to be told what's right and what's wrong. So liberal Christianity is struggling. Conservative Christianity is also struggling because they're now being associated with racism, with anti-immigration. Anyone that is not us is bad, basically. They've associated themselves with the Zionist movement and so forth, and they are now being perceived as the group that is willing to vote for someone who is misogynistic or someone who has, how many felonies? Like 32 convicted felonies, right? Or someone who paid hush money, to prostitutes and so forth. You're going to vote for this guy like this? Your Jesus is going to be okay with this? And so a lot of young Christians are now thinking like, the left Christianity has failed us, right Christianity has failed us, and so we really have no choice at this point but to either become atheist or, hopefully, come to us. Right? We're going to take care of them. Judaism, I think, is struggling with the same thing because you have liberal Jews, especially in America. And I talk particularly about Reform Judaism. Many people, by the way, many Jews who go to the synagogue on Saturdays are atheists. You may not understand this. For you, I think it sounds crazy, but for Jews, it's perfectly normal because the Jewish community, they don't think of themselves as you think of yourself as a Muslim. They think of themselves as a member of the black community thinks of themselves. They think that this is an ethnic or a racial association. So I am at the temple because I'm with my people. It's like a black person in Arkansas going to the church to be with the black community to sing the hymns of the Episcopalian or the Pentecostal church because that's their cultural experience. And so a lot of people go to these Reform synagogues. They reject the validity of the Bible. They reject the validity of the Talmud. They reject the historicity of Moses. What else is left? Right? Yet, they are extreme Zionists and fully supportive of Israel in its carnage against the Palestinians. Right? You go to the far right of Judaism, you have the Hasidic or the very conservative Jewish types that are anti-modernity. They are opposed, they outright hate Christians, they outright hate Muslims. They believe in the literal interpretations of the Torah, of the Old Testament of the Bible. Even the things that would absolutely make zero sense, the things that have been clashing directly with science and so on and so forth. And so, but again, they are both unified by the cause of Zionism. They both support the killing of Palestinians just as equally. And so I think we've witnessed in recent times an exodus of sorts that is happening among a lot of young Christians, but also among a lot of young Jews. I don't know if you guys noticed that. There is this intifada, so to speak, among American Jewry, where you see a lot of these young Jewish people going on social media and basically saying that they're becoming pro-Palestinian, and as they become pro-Palestinian, they are actually opening up their hearts to Islam. And there's been a lot of conversion to Islam coming out of the Jewish community, especially in this past year, right? So, okay, let's assume that this exodus is already happening. Every single Friday, almost every single Friday, we have Shahada ceremonies and so forth. But what is happening in the Muslim community in order to accommodate all of those people? It can't just be, having the right chaplain, taking them out for coffee and giving them a volunteer, hour at the masjid, or teaching them how to pray, and here's how to make wudu. All that is important. But what else is important is to answer their very difficult questions. All right? And so, if thought and intellect and rationality, if that is one of the essential foundations of imaratul ard, of the cultivation of this earth for the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we have to always be ready with proper answers, with intellectually stimulating answers. And I think that is one of the things that Surah Al-Baqarah effectively does, right? On the other hand, we also said that al-mal, wealth, is another foundation of cultivating the earth for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, all your good ideas are for naught if they are not perpetuated by wealth, by the proper financial resources. All right, I could be like sitting right here, saying all kinds of amazing things all day long, but if you are sitting in the back of the masjid and you can't hear me because we don't have money to pay for the microphone, it's all for nothing, right? And if we're not able to put some of these lectures, I'm just using myself as a very poor example, if I'm being honest, right? But if we don't have money to subscribe and put some videos on YouTube, the extra 300 people that would have watched the video have not watched the video. And so, there is, money can take good ideas that extra mile, right? All the brothers and the sisters that are involved in da'wah work, you have to buy the books, and you have to buy the Qur'ans, and you have to buy the brochures, and you have to, take time off work, and you have to pay like a permit fee with the mall or the expo or whatever. All money that has to be spent. All the packages for new Muslims, the integration of Muslim inmates that are recently released, and so forth. All of that. And I'm just talking about the da'wah front of things. Think of everything else. Think of Muslims having media presence. Think of Muslims, having one page sponsored in the New York Times. Think of Muslims building strong institutions. Think of Muslims building a masjid. Think of Muslims doing lobbying and doing advocacy. None of this. All your good ideas are good for nothing if they're not supported by financial resources. All right? So Surah Al-Baqarah also teaches us that money is just as important as ideas. Okay? Ideas are great, but without, in fact, some bad ideas become very popular using the right amount of money. Okay? It doesn't matter. Money will get it done for you, even if it's a terrible idea. Now imagine if it is a good idea. But we said that the Islamic financial system has its own qualities and has its own principles. And I'm going to remind you of some of the things that we said last time, right? We said that the Islamic financial system has particular principles, that true ownership resides in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, we talked about this last time. We are only clients that are permitted to use. Number two, Islam respects the rights of that short-term usage. So yes, we are tenants and not true owners, but Islam respects the rights of that tenancy and ensures our transactional freedom, right? Number three, we also said that there needs to be a balance between individual and communal interests, whereas in the capitalist system, individual interest comes before anything and everything. In the communist system, the communal interest comes before individual interest. In fact, there's no individual interest to begin with. The Islamic system acknowledges the balance between both. Number four, there is blanket prohibition on usury. Okay? Money cannot grow with the means of riba and other forms of transactions that put the individual at a disadvantage. They call it bay'ul gharar, right? It's the types of transactions that take advantage of someone's ignorance, or exploits them, right? Or when you sell something that you do not possess. By the way, a lot of people have been asking me about this, and maybe I should mention it. The whole drop shipping thing. All right, the whole drop shipping concept is considered, in accordance with Islamic law, bay'ul gharar. It's considered a deceptive transaction. Why? Because, very simply, because there is a blanket prohibition in Islamic law on selling something that you do not own. So if you pay Alibaba, a down payment of $5,000, and now you have an account with them, and in that account you select certain items. This is one of the things that the scholars said would mitigate the situation, right? So you pay the money up front to Alibaba. Let's say that that's the warehouse from which you buy your items. And then you have this account with them. And then in that account, you start selecting items, and those items are now purchased. They're yours. You don't have to take possession of them. You don't need to bring them to Sacramento to your own garage, but they're yours, even if they are still in the possession of Alibaba. And then on your website, now you're able to list those items and sell them, right? That's one way of doing it, the halal way. But all these young guys are so happy with their, making thousands of dollars, from drop shipping. But if there's no barakah in a financial transaction and it's haram, this is not a way you want to start your life, right? One of the things that you could also do is have an agreement with potential buyers. Okay, the money is sort of withheld, perhaps in an escrow account. And some people, by the way, have been working on this. These like micro escrows. There's these services that are now available. So you purchase a micro escrow account as opposed to macro escrows that are used for real estate. So you purchase a micro escrow account, and then potential buyers will put their money as let's say that they bought a watch or a pen that you have on your listings. The money doesn't come to your bank account. The money goes to an escrow account. And now that the money is there with a third party, that's when you go and grab the pen from Alibaba and then send it to this guy. And then when they receive it, that's when the money is released to you. So you have to ensure that your transaction is halal. It can't just be like, whatever, it doesn't matter, just It looks cool, everyone does it. That's never an argument, right? And that's what sets the Islamic financial system apart from the Western financial systems. Ours actually has principles and values in it. It's oriented for the hereafter. It's about salvation and not profitability. Profitability is only, incidental or accidental in the process. All right. So there is blanket prohibition on usury and other, transactions, particularly gharar, that puts an individual at a disadvantage, including deceptive transactions where you're selling something that you do not possess. Another haram transactions would be games of chance, for instance. And I use games of chance because it's a wider blanket as opposed to saying gambling. And people are going to say, oh, what about lottery? Or put them all together, in a label, and we just call them games of chance. All of that, where profitability is a mere accident. In that particular case, that would also be haram. And number 5, solidarity between individuals and voluntarily sharing wealth is paramount to a welfare society. All right, so the emphasis on giving generously, donating our financial resources to those who are destitute, those who are not as blessed as we are, is absolutely essential to the Islamic financial ideal in order to build that welfare society, right? The Islamic financial system also has certain qualities, right? So these are the principles. Now there's a list of qualities as well. It is Rabbani, it is a godly system, right? And it derives its principles from the Creator, and therefore is immutable in that sense. It doesn't just change by the desire of man. It doesn't change by the evolution of society. It doesn't change by the ebbs and flows of the political process. It's stable because it is godly. Number 2, takes human nature into full consideration, appreciates the desire for success and liberty to own, opposes communal ownership and excessive regulation, but still leaves room for laws, order, and rules. Right? So there's balance about the Islamic financial philosophy. There's also balance between individual and society, between matter and spirit, between freedom and responsibility, between stability and growth, between production and consumption, between justice and mercy. All right. Last but not least, it is based in ethical considerations, which I think is the most important quality of the Islamic financial system. All right. So these are these are the principles and the qualities of the Islamic financial system. So when we think of the Islamic system, there are usually things that come to mind. I'm going to use the word financial system in general, or financial/economic system, okay? And I'm going to ask you right now, what are some of the words that come to mind when the word financial system, is articulated, is uttered? What are some of the things that come to mind? Some words, random words. First thing that comes to your mind when I say financial systems. Taxes, definitely. Banks, that comes to mind right away. What else comes to mind when I say financial systems or economic systems? Stock, definitely, including stock options, right, which are just securities, on those stocks. What else comes to mind? Say again? No, I'm talking about financial instruments, actual financial instruments. What comes to mind? Maybe, but I mean, perhaps in some Muslim settings you would see a waqf system, but that's not a very common financial device, at least not in Western countries. Say again? Bonds, definitely. Bonds, government securities, right? SEC regulations, S&P companies, Fortune 500, right? These are some of the things that come to our mind. We definitely interest rates. Wouldn't we look at interest rates right away? When you think financial systems, you have to look at interest rates, right? What about insurance? Absolutely integral to any financial system is to have, the right type of insurance. What else? We think as far as nations are concerned, we think of what? We think of GDP, we think of per capita income, we think of GNP, We think of quarterly reports, stock exchange. We think the entities themselves, LLCs and S corps and C corps and so forth. We think, debts. We think ROIs. We think solvency, right? Without solvency, we have nothing. We think import, export. We think production, consumers. We think real estate market. We think big malls. We think consumer electronics. There's so many things that come to mind when we say financial system. When we say the American financial system, all of these things usually come to mind. And here's the problem with this. The problem is that as a Muslim, when you conceive of a Muslim financial system, what do? You're going to take all of these things and you're going to give them what? You're going to give them an Islamic flavor or Islamic taste or an Islamic variation. And your mind is going to stop there. That's why I'm telling you, good ideas are so important. Western ideals, Western intellectual ideals have prevailed in the world because, the Western world, the white Christian West has been, on top for the last 300 years or longer, all right? And so not just militarily, but also intellectually and economically. And so all the not only the financial institutions, financial conceptions, financial ideas are still derived from the Western set of ideals. And so even when I'm trying to be creative, the absolute highest level of my creativity is to say, I need a bank, but that bank needs to be what? To be Islamic, right? So you see these really poor people. They go to Wells Fargo. And then there is a teller right over there that does conventional transactions. And then there's another teller that does the Islamic transactions. And that person knows in their heart that it's an absolute sham. This is a lie. You're lying to yourself. And Wells Fargo doesn't do that, by the way. I'm just saying, like if you go to Muslim countries, HSBC, for example, is a very famous European bank. Has branches all over the Middle East. It is the absolute biggest joke that no one is laughing at. All right? There is Far'u al-Mu'amalat al-Islamiyya. There is usually a branch for Islamic transactions within the branch itself, and then there is conventional lending or conventional transactions. Once the tellers take your money, what's going to happen to it? Oh, it goes into the same pot. But hey, I feel good. When I think insurance, I'm so upset at the exploitation of the insurance industry, taking advantage of people, lobbying lawmakers to force citizens to carry insurance policies, and how the money is taken and invested and put in all kinds of horrific things. And even when you need the money and something happened to the car, you go through the hoops in order to get them to actually write you a check. Right? So people look at that and say, oh man, insurance is messed up. We have to do it right. So you think of the Islamic form of insurance, which again is just a variation of the same thing with some type of a perceived, or a made up, a fabricated Muslim flavor, right? You think of loans to start a business. I don't like riba, interest-based loans, in conventional transactions, so I need loans. But those loans need to be like some kind of Islamic. I need to bring some kind of an Islamic flavor to those loans in order for this to be palatable and for me to kind of feel good about it. So we start maybe fluctuating interest rates, which by the way Al-Azhar has done a long time ago. Al-Azhar's argument is very simple. If interest rates fluctuate, then interest-based transactions are halal, right? And so when someone told him, yes, in America, interest rates fluctuate because, the Federal Reserve, keeps changing interest rates. If that's the case, then khalas, it's halal. As long as it fluctuates based on market conditions, then risk is being shared by all parties involved, and that somehow makes it halal. I don't think that's the proper response. But I'm not able to fault Al-Azhar either, because Al-Azhar, when you think about it, as an institution, it's still modeled after the Western university model, right? They have, a veterinarian school, they have a medical school, they have an engineering school, they have this school and that school. but in addition to studying, the sciences and so forth, they still study Quran and Hadith and Da'wah and all the other Islamic sciences. Again, at face value, this actually sounds exciting. Oh, that's amazing. We're going to be producing doctors that are Huffaz al-Quran. But in practice, you are taking a mold that was a template, so to speak, that was built in the Western ethos, and you're trying to take Islamic ideals and shove them into something where we don't fit. They don't fit into that template. And so I don't blame them for reaching these conclusions because they are victims of their intellectual environment, right? They're not able to see beyond that, right? So going back to the economic system, all we do in order to generate solutions or conceive of a viable Islamic financial system is take Western templates and try to kind of Islamize them a little bit. And that it hasn't worked in Pakistan. It has not worked in Saudi Arabia. It has not worked in Malaysia. It has not worked in any of those countries because you are still connected to the same international financial system. You are still connected to the same companies. You are still bound by the same rules, rules that you did not set, by the way. Rules that were set by the powerful. You are still a satellite to that system, and there is absolutely no way that you can break free from its ailments and from its sinister nature, right? The Western financial system has only one purpose, and one purpose alone. And what is that? Profitability. That's it. Nothing else matters more than making the individual as profitable as possible. All right? Whereas the Islamic financial system, see, like all the list that I gave you, right? Profitability comes with that, but it is not the most essential of all the principles. All right? The Islamic financial system, as part of the Sharia, it regulates Muslim financial transactions with the purpose of helping you live a good life, but most importantly, achieve what? Achieve salvation. To achieve salvation before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our attempts intellectually are futile. It's almost like, I don't know, some of you are going to like this example, some of you are going to hate it so much. But it's almost like getting an internal combustion engine and trying to fit it in what appears to be the hood of an electric car. You put it in there and it's like, wait, I'm trying to connect this thing. Where's the thing? Where's the pipe, the tube, the exhaust, the cable? There's nothing. So you just put it in there anyway. And now the car is not being powered by electricity. It's definitely not being powered by gasoline. So what do you do with the car in order to get it from point A to point B? You have to push it. You have to manually just push it. That's what we've done. The Islamic financial system is the electric car. And I'm not saying this as an advocate of Tesla or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, if the Islamic financial system is the electric car, and if the Western financial system is the diesel engine, putting the diesel engine under the, I mean, it's not a hood really, it's a trunk. Right? It's just at the front of the car. Putting that in the trunk is not necessarily gonna make the car move. It's neither electric nor diesel at this point, and in order to get it moving, you have to basically manually push it with your own hands. So this is a common conceptual mistake that we make. And I understand. We, as Muslims, we live in the West. Muslims who live in Muslim countries, they're still under military occupation. Who are we kidding? We're kidding ourselves, right? The Israelis rule Egypt by proxy, right? Sisi does not report to the Egyptian people. His loyalty is entirely to the CIA and the Mossad. He doesn't work for the Egyptian people. The current government in Pakistan has absolutely zero interest in the Pakistani people. They report to the West, right? And most of the Muslim world is unfortunately like this. So I understand if you're a Muslim that lives in UAE or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Syria or Lebanon or Algeria or whatever, you don't have that many choices. So you have to get by and you have to figure it out and you have to use the instruments that are available to you in order to survive. Right? I'm not saying let's all live in Mauritania and live in the desert and abandon the international financial system. That's not going to work either. All right. So we exist in it and we're part of it, but we should not be stupid about it. We should not be we should not be naive about this, and we should not be foolish about this. And as Muslims who live in Western countries, right, we also acknowledge that we are part of this system, and we have to have bank accounts, and we have to have credit cards, and we'll avoid haram as much as we can, and we'll try to purify our wealth as much as we can, and we'll try to come up with creative ways to finance our projects, possibly, hopefully, avoiding usury and riba and interest and so forth as much as we can. But we also understand that it is impossible to liberate ourselves entirely from a system that is designed to exploit, right? But what is worse than using that system is to think that that system somehow can be rehabilitated. It cannot be rehabilitated because it was produced as a you know, I don't want to say you know, an inappropriate word in the masjid. This is the illegitimate child of the Renaissance, all right, and as such, it was thought to serve certain purposes. But I think now, 300-400 years into the experiment, we're realizing now, you know, politically speaking, economically speaking, militarily speaking, you know, this is not working. The whole experiment of liberal democracy, the whole experiment of capitalism, it's not working. It's not working in America with the massive poverty that we experience in this country, the massive disparity of income, the massive exploitation, you know, how minorities in this country are, you know, disproportionately subjected to very strict laws. You have someone who gets convicted 35 felonies or something like this, and that person will 99.9% become the next president of the United States, right? And then someone, a minority person, makes a small little mistake, may actually go to prison for life, right? Even the law itself and how it's being applied, you know, is not fair and equitable any longer, at least as theory suggested it. Justice, it looks like you had a question. I'm sorry, I didn't ignore you.
Are you saying that an Islamic financial system is not going to work in a non-Islamic, let's say, political system in a non-Islamic society? It's not going to, it may be there, but it's not going to produce the results desired.
The desired results or the desired effects. Absolutely, that's precisely what I'm saying. You know, what I'm saying is that, just to be very specific, what I'm saying is that both the components and the framework need to be Islamic in order for the Islamic financial experiment to be carried out. You cannot take a Western framework and fill it with Islamic components. It just won't work, or it will work with very poor results. The vehicle might still move, but it's moving like stalled at 15 miles an hour. You know, it's not reaching, you know, its potential, you know, whatsoever. And so I say this because we should not be shy as Muslims to conceive of a world where all of these things have been replaced. You know, I think we really need to unleash our imagination. You are the sons and the daughters of this era, and therefore you are trapped. You are intellectually and mentally and psychologically trapped in the limitations of your own era, okay? And you think that there is nothing else that exists. But everything that we have today, whether it's political or social or economic or financial, in the Western world did not exist 300 years ago and will not exist 300 years from today. So it's, if we were to conceive of a future, we need to be bold enough and brave enough and courageous enough to conceive of a future where the economic system is not entirely based on profitability, where billionaires who have hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in banks and without any limitation buying properties across the world, paying minimal tax, you need to imagine a world where that is not going to be possible. And I'm not saying that it's not going to be possible because of government intervention or putting a cap on people's, you know, wealth. No, it will be a self-correcting mechanism. You need to conceive of a system, you know, where not every loan is based in interest, and not every insurance policy is based in exploitation, and not you know, every government bond, you know, is based on internal debt. You need to conceive of a financial system that takes into account transcendental considerations, that takes into account the well-being of the individual in the life of this world, but also the next. A financial system over which a government presides, a government that is not sovereign in and of itself, or not a government that reports to a people of sorts, but rather government and people that are both accountable to a creator in whose hands true sovereignty resides, right? And so, of course, conversations on financial system, it cannot be had without talking about the political system that conceives, of that financial system. And I want to talk a little bit about this because, this is really important. You may commit the same mistake and dream of a polity of sorts in the future. And that polity is an Islamic polity. And I have to be very careful with the words that I use, because if I said Islamic State, people have all kinds of weird conceptions about that. That word has been hijacked. We have to be careful. It's like Osama. Like a lot of Muslim families are now not calling their kids Osama. It's like, dude, that was 20 years ago, that was a problem. I don't think it's an issue anymore, right? So Islamic State. So I'm just going to use Islamic governance or an Islamic polity, right? So we often dream of what that would look like, right? A polity, a political entity that truly delivers justice, that truly delivers a welfare state, that honors its citizens, that collaborates with its people in order to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A truly ideal polity that becomes the embodiment of the Islamic spirit. So what do? We still think of a variation of the Western nation state and try to give it the Islamic flavor. And you see this, like, take Pakistan, for example, as a good example of this, right? When Pakistan was conceived as an independent nation, out of India, the initial premises were valid and were good and inspiring, right? In fact, some great scholars were involved in that project, including, Allama Iqbal and Muhammad Asad and some of these incredible minds that truly believed. But the mistake, I think, that they made, maybe more of the Pakistani leadership than Iqbal himself, but I think the mistake that was made is that a Western-style government was created, and then it was kind of a Muslim flavor was added to it. All right? So you have the same thing. You have the separation of powers. There's a judiciary, there's a legislature, and then there is the executive branch. You have the parliamentary system, you have political parties, you have the banks, you have all of the components of the Western system. But you know what? We're gonna make it Islamic, right? How do we make it Islamic? By changing the name of the party from the Pan-European Democratic Party into the Islamic Party of Pakistan. That's not what's going to make it Islamic. You're still using the party system, which is a product of Western civilization, and you're just tweaking the names a little bit. Even the nation state, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this just to make sure that I have some time. The nation state. Even when you conceive, because the nation state is the framework, right? I'm not talking about the components now. I'm talking about the framework. This is the pot where you put all of your ingredients, right? The pot itself, the nation state as a conceptual ideal, right, is still cooked up in the kitchen of Western philosophy in the last 300 years. The pre-modern era had no concept of a nation state. What is a nation state as we understand it today? A nation state is a country. How did that country come to existence, right? Some random drunk person sitting in Europe somewhere, right, smoking a cigar, sat there and says, you know what, we're going to make a country right here. And then this is it. This is Jordan. That's it. That's why Jordan looks so crooked on the map, right? This is it. And we're going to draw a line right here between, Egypt and Sudan used to be like one part of one historical nation, right? We're just going to draw a line right here arbitrarily. And here, this is going to be Sinai, and that's going to be Gaza. Do you know that the city of Rafah in Gaza is a Palestinian city, right? But there is an Egyptian Rafah. Did you know that?
Yeah.
There's an Egyptian Rafah on the other side of the border. Why? Because this whole thing was just a Rafah. And then when they drew that line, it literally sliced homes. There are houses, part of the house is on the Egyptian side, and part of the house is on the Palestinian/Israeli side, whatever you want to call it, right? Definitely the Palestinian side. And suddenly, the person that woke up in the morning, right, sleeping in the bedroom on that side became Egyptian, and the person that woke up in the morning on the other side became, I mean, to this day, I think they're still struggling with the labels, but at least you and I would call them Palestinian. Is that really substantial? Is that even meaningful whatsoever? The tribes, the Nubian tribes in southern parts of Egypt, right, they literally woke up in the morning when that line was drawn. And the line was drawn because, you know, Jamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt at the time, who in his own right was another instrument, by the way, of Western hegemony and colonialism, right? His negotiations with the Sudanese people failed, right? Literally at that time, this is how it was conceived. His negotiations with the southern parts of his own country failed. Therefore, it was lost. By the way, what happened to the Sudan 50 years later? The same exact thing happened. Omar al-Bashir still failed as a leader, so he lost the southern half of Sudan. That's why you have, you know, Sudan and South Sudan. How did this come about? Where a line was drawn arbitrarily in the sand. Those who live in that line become citizens of a particular government. They have rights, they have responsibilities, they get recruited in the army, you know, they pay taxes, they vote, all of that. If you are the brother and you just happen to be like, taking the goats a little bit far off reservation, and then the colonialists drew the line before you come back for dinner, now you're Libyan and not Egyptian anymore. Literally, this is how it happened in the Middle East. This is how it happened. This is how it happened in Africa. All of Africa is like this. And if you look particularly to Africa, the lines are more arbitrary and more fabricated than any other part of the world. Why? Because there is a lot more wealth and a lot more promise in Africa, so it needed to be diced and sliced as much as possible. So we cut people up, and we cut the tribes, and we cut the connections and the kinships and the bonds, and then turn them against each other, and then give both weapons so they fight each other. And then when they fight each other, see, I told you, these are barbarians. They need our protection. That's why we have to keeping them from hurting each other. You see, this is not a conspiracy, by the way. This is not conspiracy theory. This is fact, 100% fact. All right? Dr. Dakani, please.
I was going to say, like, for example, I'm from East Africa.
Uh-huh.
There's a family where the minister, there's a minister in the Kenyan government, and his brother is a minister in Uganda.
Two brothers.
Two brothers. Just like the way you say. I mean, they came and put an arbitrary line.
Absolutely.
And that's why you have a lot of conflicts. People who are never divided are now divided.
Conflicts over territory, you know, tribes that used to graze the land. You know, you're telling me, like, where are we supposed to go? Are we supposed to decide, like, you know, move here or move there? Like, are we supposed to decide? The nation, the concept of the nation state is a modern abomination that makes absolutely zero sense. Okay? Yet, and that's the funny part, these same people that were diced and sliced so effectively are going to wake up one morning thinking that somehow there is a unique historical depth to my citizenship and to my people and some type of a metaphysical quality to my ancestors. And then you're Ugandan and you're Kenyan, and the Kenyans are definitely better than everyone knows it. The Kenyans are better than the Ugandans. On what basis? I don't know, but it's just, we're Kenyans. We have to be better than Ugandans and Somalis and Ethiopians and everyone else because we're Kenyans. Why? I don't know. And so all the chauvinism and all the patriotism and all the crazy nationalism already originate from this corrupt ideal, you know, the nation state. And so to take that abomination and to try to make it into an Islamic thing, or to take that corrupt, broken framework and to try to fill it with Islamic components is a futile undertaking from day one. It will achieve neither the nation state nor the Islamic ideals. So as much as it would be a failure to try to apply the Islamic ideals in a Western financial system, it would be a worse failure to try to apply the Islamic political values into a framework, again, that has originated in the nation state. And I'm going to show you some differences here. In the nation state, who is the sovereign? Who is the perceived sovereign? Someone said the Constitution, someone said the king. Many of us would say the people. Like Americans would say the sovereign in America really is the people. How many of us actually believe that? Government in the nation state ultimately becomes a self-serving institution. It becomes, has a personality of its own, right? Government serves government. Government doesn't serve the Constitution. Government doesn't serve the founding fathers. Government certainly does not serve the people. Government serves government, right? The true sovereign is not the law. The true sovereign is certainly not the people. The true sovereign in a nation state is the government. Who is the true sovereign in an Islamic setting of governance or an Islamic polity? I mean, it's very difficult you cannot call it a state. The true sovereign is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the government and the people are both equally accountable before God, right? In liberal democracies in particular, we always talk about the rule of law. We always talk about the importance of the rule of law and so on and so forth, accountability before the law. So people presumably make laws through their lawmakers, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that is actually not true. Ultimately, in the Islamic polity, right, who makes laws? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At least that's how it's supposed to be, right? Without any type of corruption, in an Islamic polity, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that makes the laws. And both the people and the government, their job is to implement the laws that have been decreed by the Creator. I'm not trying to be oversimplistic. I know that there is massive complexities in all of this, and people will get their PhDs studying a lifetime in order to actually get into the nitty-gritty of simple blanket statements such as this. All right. In liberal democracies, nation states, powers are presumably separated, and that has become so foundational, like to us. Like we can't imagine a setting where powers are not separated. It has to be the legislature and the courts, the judiciary, and the executive, right? Like for us, that is a prerequisite for democracy. Like without that, we cannot even conceive of democracy. But it's really funny because, and I'm going to make some quick commentary on this, there is something that is inherently contradictory and antithetical in the Constitution itself. Because on the one hand, it advocates for the separation of power. And on the other hand, it says that the powers do what to each other? They're supposed to balance each other. Checks and balances. If you are so separated from each other, how are you going to check each other? You only check each other by not being separated from each other. That's the whole point of checks and balances, is that we're not talking about three separate bubbles. We're not talking about three separate domains. We're talking about things that are connected. That's why they're able to check each other. So there is no actual separation of powers. It's just about the degree of separation. All right? And by the way, that separation has been completely obliterated. For instance, if you look at Europe, most European democracies are what? They're presidential or parliamentary. Most of them are parliamentary democracies. In the parliamentary democracy, forget about the US system. I know that that's what you're familiar with. where there's Congress and then there's presidents. That's a presidential system. But in a parliamentary system, who makes the laws? Who is the legislature? Members of what? Members of parliament, right? Who becomes the ministers of the executive branch? Members of parliament, right? Who becomes the prime minister, who is the head of the executive branch? Member of parliament, right? So it's essentially the whole separation of the legislative branch and the executive branch has already been obliterated in Europe. It's gone. It's gone, right? Now, here in the US, when the majority of Congress follows the same political party of the president, what usually happens most of the time when it comes to decision making and executive decisions? Say again? Exactly. Most decisions, most legislation is delegated to the president. You go ahead and decide, right?
But he has advisories too, right? He has his branch
Advisors that, again, all of them are represented by the president, okay? There's a massive institution behind him, but he is the symbol of that institution. We call him collectively the executive branch of government, all right? And their leader is the president of the United States. But what I'm saying is that there is no separation when members of Congress and the presidents are in political cahoots with each other, okay? In fact, when the majority of Supreme Court justices also follow the political, persuasion of the president, then now the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive branch are literally all connected with each other, all making, most likely it's the president that sets the tone and everyone kind of falls in line. Another good example of how the separation of powers in the US is really just a complete utter joke is that, yes, Congress legislates, but Congress legislates in pretty big overarching laws. When it comes to, just the day-to-day operations of civil society, when it comes to the actual day-to-day operations of government, who actually makes the rules? Exactly. It's the regulators and the executives of the federal government are the ones that make the rules. 90% of the laws of the DMV are not decided by the California legislature. They're decided by, the members of the executive branch. The actual laws that affect your life, they are not decided by elected people. They're decided by appointed people, right? So we can kid ourselves all the time, the separation of powers, that's the foundation, of a liberal democracy. That's actually not. It is not true in practice, and it's certainly not true in principle either. To assume that the separation of power is a prerequisite of democratic practices is just mere faith. Like that even scholars of constitutional theory are now, bringing to question, very, very blatantly. And the problem, I think, with the American people is that conversations that take place in academia, more often than not, do not kind of trickle down to society until like decades later. It takes a very long time for academic conversations to become popular. The nation state is a concept when people who happen to arbitrarily live in a particular geographic location enjoy certain rights that the person on the other side of that border does not enjoy. The welfare state, food stamps, housing, all of these things that are afforded to the guy that lives literally, like your shoulder literally touches the border with Mexico. That's where your hut is. All right? And then there is the other guy whose shoulder, your cousin, most likely, whose left shoulder touches the other side of the border in Tijuana. Okay? Both of them are the same people, same ethnicity, same language, come from the same family, and this line was drawn. All right? The guy that lives here is entitled to certain things, and the guy on the other side, for all I care, can just go ahead and die. I am not responsible for that person whatsoever. All right? These are the teachings of the nation state. When it comes to loyalty, the person that lives on this side of the border is expected to be loyal to this government and expected to participate in the military in the event of war, is supposed to pay taxes, is not supposed to collaborate with a foreign government and so forth, whereas such expectations are not had from the other guy that lives on the other side of the border. So if this guy spoke with the Mexican government, that's not going to be considered treason. But if his cousin on this side in San Diego spoke with the Mexican government, that would be considered treason, right? Neither of them made any choice in the matter. I just woke up in the morning and I just realized that there's a line that separated me from my cousin, right? The nation state is only responsible to itself and accountable to its own sovereign government, while the Muslim system is accountable ultimately to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the nation state, the government rules a nation of people. You can actually count them. But in the Islamic governance, the nation is replaced by an ummah. What is an ummah? An ummah is people who are united by what? They are united by an ideal that they voluntarily become a party of. Voluntarily, as opposed to the nation state. Okay? Justice was born here, he's an American, right? He doesn't have a choice in the matter unless he actively foregoes his citizenship or denounces his citizenship or something like this. Immigrants that come to America, they become Americans by choice, and they either accept you or not. That is entirely the prerogative of government. All right. Whereas in the Islamic setting of government, of governance, by mere committing myself to this ideal, I have become a member of that ummah automatically, and it doesn't matter where I live. And so essentially, I have more in common. Brother, where are you from? You're from Sri Lanka. I have more in common with this brother than all the Egyptian Christians that I grew up with. Even though we grew up together in the same entity, in the same culture, we spoke the same language, but I have more in common with this brother. Why? Because both of us voluntarily decided to commit ourselves to the ideals of that ummah that is called the Ummatul Islam. Right? In the nation state, the stated purpose of government is to operate in the interests of its people and its people alone. Of course, most of the time that doesn't even happen. But I'm just saying, even if it does happen, then the government is only accountable to its people and operates in the interest of its own people. In Islamic governance, both the government and the people operate to serve the purpose of the true sovereign, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to secure the welfare of the individual in this life and in the next as well. The purpose of law in the nation state ultimately is what? Is order. Otherwise there'd be chaos. These people are going to cut each other to pieces if there's no laws. Whereas the purpose of Sharia ultimately is what? Is salvation. All the steps that Sharia takes are designed to help you be saved in the afterlife. So to speak of a modified Western economic system that is cosmetically adjusted to become compatible with Islam is tantamount, again, to trying to fit something into a mold that would ultimately break both. Now, next session I need to answer two questions. Number one, what does the Islamic polity actually look like? Or potentially looks like? And what are the practical components of the Islamic financial system and its foundations in the real world? And what is that sort of like conceived financial system that we need to be dreaming of, in the future, inspired by Surat Baqarah? This, inshallah ta'ala, what we have to cover in the upcoming sessions. Still quite a bit of ways to go with Surat Baqarah. I would have hoped to finish it. I think we probably need like 10 more sessions in order to get all of this covered. So I'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala, and I'll take some of your questions, and then we will pray Maghrib, inshallah ta'ala, when it enters. I think Maghrib is due at 8:25, something like that. Yes, please.
I have several comments. I thought the whole topic was really interesting. And so in regards to, just to verify the comment of, checks and balances are very good and that curious, you guys are interested in like to the Supreme Court and stuff like that. There's a lot of Supreme Court cases that kind of disintegrate the separation between the judiciary, the judicial system, and the legislative system right now. And so I'll give you two cases. So there's Chevron deference and a lot of the abortion cases as well too. Kind of highlight that conflict and give basically courts the power to interpret the laws of which legislation
Exactly.
passes. And then to the second thing, I think you talk about the Islamic financial system not prioritizing profitability, right, and kind of prioritizing quality of life and stuff like that, quality of community and stuff. I work in healthcare policy, and there's such models like that happening within healthcare policy, healthcare finance, where providers, they get paid for what services they do, but they also get paid in bonuses for the quality of the outcomes that the patients have as well. And so that's really interesting. It kind of highlights what you're.
Right. So you have an incentive to actually make things work and not just do the bare minimum.
Exactly.
Right. Going back to the Supreme Court, I think a lot of people may not know this, but the essential nature of the Supreme Court is to legislate. People think that the Supreme Court decides, on disputes over legislation, but essentially what the Supreme Court does is make laws and not be the judge in matters of law. I think that's really important to establish, and that is entirely politically driven. The other piece here is that without even going into particular cases, if you look at the American court system in general, it always needs this advocate. There is a culture of discipline and formality in the American court system that actually makes it very elitist. Like, as an average citizen, you're not able to kind of defend your own case. It's kind of looked down upon, like, what's wrong with you? Are you crazy? You need to hire an attorney. You need to hire an attorney that is familiar with the legal jargon, that will be able to use the right words and the right vocabulary, and use some type of theatrical performance in order to impress, a very uneducated jury that is not fit for conducting their own financial decisions, let alone decide on the life of someone who is facing the capital punishment, right? And somehow we're supposed to believe that the outcome of this, of this bad joke is going to be just and fair, all right? And so in the Islamic system, such formality is actually not expected and certainly not encouraged. To the contrary, the judge is from the people, advocates for the people, defends the right of the people. In the American court system, the judge belongs to the elite. The judge rubs shoulder with the executive branch. The judge doesn't represent you. The judge represents the people in power, because the judge comes from the circles of power. Only people who are very powerful, from very powerful families, will actually get the privilege of, getting selected to be a, circuit judge or whatever that is. Whereas in the Islamic system, judges are the fuqaha and the jurists that come from the simple ranks of society. Therefore, their primary job is to defend people. The judge in the American system is presumably impartial, but the judge in the Islamic system actually sides with the defendant, and the judge's job is to find a way to get the defendant out. And that's why you cannot take this and you cannot take the Western court and somehow give it a little paint and a little flavor and turn it into an Islamic court. That's not the case. But I wanted to speak to something really specific, and that is in American adjudication, a clause that is used constantly by attorneys in order to get things done is what? It's precedence. What is precedence? It's to make reference to a court case where a judge in this particular case decided on a similar case this way or that way. And so I take legal precedence as grounds to make a similar decision in a case that is different from it's definitely not the case, not the same defendant, right? But I take that precedence in order to apply it on this particular case. What does that essentially lead to? It's just legislation. You're literally making new laws. You're not waiting for Congress to legislate. You are just kind of deciding on your own. Okay, since someone in Louisiana made that decision, then we in California 35 years later, we cannot ignore the precedents, right? And literally the precedents is just another way of getting the courts to legislate and take the right to legislate away from Congress. There is so many examples, by the way, to recount about how the separation of powers has become literally like an absolute utter joke. Neither was it essential for the implementation of democratic ideals, by the way, in the first place. Like that is a very contentious matter. We have not even reached an agreement on this. In the Islamic system, such separation does not particularly exist, right? Sometimes the executive branch, and sometimes the judges, and sometimes the lawmakers, sometimes they all make laws together. Are we in a position to say, oh, this is undemocratic? I think this would be a subject of another conversation, obviously. But I wanted to point that out because it's a very stark example of how those lines have been completely removed. Any other questions? Yes.
Maybe I should ask you this question in your next session because the relevancy will be more accurate. But just to get your perspective, is there any Islamic country that is actually standing on the principles of Islamic financial system and socioeconomic system at this point? Like any Islamic country that represents the Islamic financial system and socioeconomic political system?
I don't think so, but I think, you're not going to like this, but I think financially speaking, Afghanistan is actually getting close. Financially speaking. I don't know about the politics, yet. But because so much has been taken away from them, and because all the assets of the Afghani government are now actually held in Western banks, tens of billions of dollars, so the Taliban government, has to get creative. And as they get creative, no one is helping them. So they're becoming less and less dependent on, the Western financial system. So they're cooking something up. And we are kind of getting bits and pieces of what they're doing. And much of it is, has roots in the Islamic financial system. Now, I don't know how well they're going to do it and how efficient it's going to be and how much is going to get fought and how much time they're going to get in order to actually see how the experiment unfolds. But, as a student of knowledge and a student of history, I am actually very curious as to how the Afghans are going to do it.
Just camelbacking on this question.
Mm-hmm.
When we have such strong, profound principles of financial system in Islam, why are all these Muslim countries operating with so much corruption, so much bribery? What is going on there that they're not understanding? And prevalently, there is so much corruption and bribery, on a day-to-day basis. And that affects the individual's life at day-to-day basis as compared to this country, where although you're saying that there's so much monopoly as far as the basic rights so much monopoly at the higher level, the lower level is still, looking at peace, and they're still looking at, their day-to-day life being in convenience. So why should we not feel happy about living in the West versus living in, in the Muslim countries where day-to-day life is hard, because there's no infrastructure, corruption, bribery, and all of that stuff, as opposed to living in the West, where apparently it seems all controlled, and higher level, whatever they're doing at the higher level, is really impacting, day-to-day life of the citizens of the country. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, you're asking, I think, so many questions at the same time. You're asking me about why there's corruption, there's financial corruption in Muslim countries. You're asking me about why there isn't in Western countries, and you're asking me about why we're here and we're not there. I don't think that I'm not going to be able to address all three questions, and I don't think that I can speak about every Muslim country, because I think the experiments are very different, from each other. But I think there are, a few things involved. Number one, Muslim countries are struggling because they've been defeated. They've been militarily obliterated. And we keep saying to ourselves that we are in the post-colonial era. We're not. We are in the very middle of the colonial era. Hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, not for very long, but we are in the thick of the colonial era, right? Perhaps there are no boots on the ground, but I think that, the local catalysts that they have left operating on their behalf are a lot worse, than any foreign intervention. If you think about it, which Muslim countries are actually free, are truly free? I would say maybe Turkey, has some independent voice of its own. Perhaps Iran with a lot of Chinese influence. Malaysia with a lot of Australian influence and Chinese as well. But I mean, you can't really find that one Muslim country that is entirely free to make an independent, to make its own decisions in a manner that serves its own people. But remember, these are all nation states too, right? And so they're struggling with the pitfalls of the nation state without financial resources. Every act of corruption that you see in Muslim countries has its own parallels right here in the Western world. Everyone. We just give it different labels, that's all. The Pakistanis are honest. They go to the politicians and they say, we're going to pay you $10,000 in order to get you elected, but you got to do these things for us, right? I respect that. It's bribery, but you know what? It's blatant, it's in your face. I respect it. That's how society operates. But here in America, we've taken bribery and made it into a law. It's just called campaign contributions, all right? Literally people who are able to, I have a friend of mine, I told you before, a friend of mine is running for Congress. We hosted him in California for 3 fundraisers, one in Sacramento, one in LA, and one in San Diego, and we still are trying to do one for him in the Bay Area. He raised about $50,000. So he talked to the Jewish congressman from the 11th district in Michigan, was a very pro-Palestine, sort of like rehabilitated Jewish politician, stopped being Zionist, right? So he's like mentoring him, right, against the Zionist incumbent. And so he tells him, what is the one, he asks my friend Ahmed asks this guy, and he says, okay, what do I need to be focused on right now? He says, fundraising. Okay. What if I raise a lot of money? What do I need to do afterwards? He said, more fundraising. He said, okay, great. What if I actually win the elections? What is the first thing that I need to do, after I wake up in the morning as a U.S. congressman? What do I need to do? He said, engage in very effective fundraising. That's all they do. All they do is raise money, right and left. Politicians, elected officials in America, their job is to go around, beg for dollars every single day. Someone else is making decisions, someone else is writing laws, someone else is doing legislation. They're doing none of that. They're operating these small political organizations where they're at the helm. They have like 25, 30 staff members, depending on how big time you are and how much money you're able to raise. And all you do, by the way, even Muslim politicians do that. What's her name? Rashida Tlaib. She is uncontested thus far. She's uncontested, and no one can win in her district. It's certainly not a Republican, and there is absolutely no Democratic challenger to her either. She has been going crazy fundraising every single day. She has $4 or $5 million in the bank that she knows she's not going to use, but she has to do fundraising. Why? Because you never know. It's about the next step and the next office and the next campaign. That's all it is. How could this possibly be good for us as citizens? How could this, I trust this person to make decisions on my behalf, to make legislation on my behalf, to embrace policies on my behalf. I want them to actually read 15, 20 pages worth of law before they vote for it. They vote for bills this thick without reading a single word in the bill. Because they're advisors or whatever, these young, and that's why, wallahi, I always say this, you know, young people who have any interest in politics, you really need to be like those congressional aides. Like, you want to be a staffer, sometimes that's more important in American politics than being an elected official. Those are the ones that make the laws. And then maybe, you know, later on when you're 45, you can run for office, but that's how you start. And so I don't think that there is much corruption between here and there. I just think there's a lot more money here that covers up the corruption. So after all the money gets divided, there is still some crumbs so that the rest of us are able to survive. And that's why we're not up in arms and mutiny against them. Where is that extra money coming from? From all those poor guys in Muslim countries that are still under occupation.
But that's also intentional to keep us satisfied enough to not revolt.
Exactly. Not too satisfied, God forbid, and not dissatisfied, but slightly fulfilled, just so that, you know, like I said, you're always worried about making more money, but at the same time, you know, you're not mutinying, you know, and rebelling against them. Any other questions? Yes.
What's your take on the BDS movement as a world organization, as a financial instrument? I don't know what to call it.
BDS?
Try to punish people who are supporting, or the corporation who are supporting.
Morally speaking, I definitely support it, 100%. And I think that BDS speaks more to Islamic ideals than to Western capitalistic ideals. Because sheer capitalism would say consumers make a decision to buy a product based on, you know, its cost-value relationship, right? Whereas a morally driven decision, you know, is inspired by a lot more than cost-benefit, okay? I need to know who made it. I need to know under what circumstances. I need to know if there's exploitation of labor involved. I need to know if this, you know, impacted the lives of other people. I need to know if the profits are going to support, you know, the Israelis. All of that is important to me. So I actually think that BDS is a moral thing, is a moral decision to do. Is it effective? I think that is a decision that has to be economically answered. And maybe we need a little bit more time. We need to, because there's also a lot of confounding factors. So if you look at the Starbucks stock, for example, and because the last 6 months, you know, their quarterly reports have shown losses, it's easy for us to associate, oh, you know, they're losing money because of BDS. Could be, or it could be a third factor that is causing both. And so we have to, I think, to give it a little time, and this needs to be studied in order for us to actually gauge its economic effectiveness. Any other questions? Yes.
And then I think, so, how is political engagement for the average citizen in the Islamic politically, right? Because I think that in today's society, the average citizen is so busy that they don't have time to think about, you know, the certain policies that affect the way of living, healthcare, car insurance, whatever like that. Therefore, the actual thinking of policies and the ideas brought about is relied on think tanks, right? And therefore, that brings a special interest, and they, like you said, fund the politicians. With all that said, the policies that are being implemented, that are being voted on, don't reflect what the people want, you know, but actually are these think tanks that have special interests. So, but I think that could be solved by.
And the think tanks are very politically driven anyway,
Yes.
and very politically funded. You would think that think tanks produce valuable ideas. They don't.
So, is in the Islamic polity, is how engaged is the average person in thinking about politics?
I think I probably will address that, inshallah, in the next session. I will talk about this. A lot of these things, we have answers for them. There's been a lot of research and stuff like that, but many of these questions also are a little bit obscure. Like, we don't know the answer, I think, to every question, and I think we just have to, you know, be, number one, historically honest, but also intellectually honest. I actually think that of all countries on earth, of all nations on earth, citizens in a liberal democracy are the least involved, which is almost counterintuitive. Because you would think that citizens in an authoritarian country, they're so scared, therefore they are a lot less involved in the political process, whereas citizens in a liberal democracy, because they have that access that they should be involved, actually, the practice on the ground shows that citizens of liberal democracies are the absolute least involved in politics. They get galvanized, they get polarized once in a while, right? How many people participated in the most recent elections? 4 years ago, about 140 million, something like this, right? That was a historical number in the U.S. And even then, what's 140 from close to 400 million American citizens? It's less than 50%, right? Isn't that crazy? Like in the most polarizing historic elections, and still less than 50% of Americans actually voted. But on average, forget about Trump and Biden. On average, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the upcoming elections. We're going to have to kind of wait and see. I am convinced that Trump is going to win, but that's not the point. The point, I'm talking about participation. Historically speaking, less than 20% of Americans actually participate in presidential elections. And significantly and drastically less participate in local elections. And so of everyone that lives here in Roseville, how many people actually contribute to who sits on the Roseville City Council? Less than 5% of the citizens of Roseville will contribute, or have a say as to who sits on the Roseville City Council. And so citizen participation in democracies is definitely very, very lagging behind. And in Muslim countries, in Muslim settings, Muslims have always been heavily involved in their own political process. They would literally lead rebellions if need be, right? And so inshallah we're going to talk more about that next time when we get together. It's not going to be for a few weeks though. Yes?
We have 500 plus members of Congress. There are over 50,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. Yep.
These are the lobbyists who have the money to fund the members of Congress and control the Congress.
Right. Which is the strongest professional association in California with the largest amount of lobbyists and the most well-funded lobbyists in all of the state of California? No. It's the correctional officers. It's not the teachers. It's correctional officers. And that's why, on average, correctional officers in California make about how much?
100 plus?
Close to $150,000 a year. On average, how much does a teacher in California make? Less than 50. Yeah. Like Pelican Bay, like Folsom, right? You see the discrepancy? I don't know. Maybe teachers, should be investing more money in lobbying. But just to see how futile this whole thing is. Just the basic idea of education is more important than putting people in prison. In fact, the lack of good education is what causes people to go to prison in the first place. Somehow just gets dismissed and it becomes like just a power politics. It's very, very sad. But anyway, inshallah, I'm going to stop here and we will pray Salat al-Maghrib together. Our staff brought you guys some coffee and tea and some really fancy refreshments I see back there. So please enjoy at your own discretion. And, please eat the macaroons responsibly, as they say. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.